They had been studying happiness for 10,000 years. Their scientists had mapped every chemical pathway that led to joy. Their engineers had built machines that could create pleasure in any brain. Their philosophers had written millions of books about the nature of contentment. They believed they understood happiness better than any species in the galaxy. Then they discovered Earth. Ambassador was the first to intercept human broadcasts. He sat in his observation station on the edge of the solar system, watching signals that the humans sent out into space. Most of what he found was confusing. Humans seemed to enjoy watching other humans pretend to be different humans. They liked looking at images of food. They argued about politics with great passion but little logic. But one broadcast stopped him cold. It was a graduation ceremony from a place called Ohio State University. Thousands of young humans sat in rows, wearing identical black robes and strange flat hats. An older human stood at a podium and talked for a very long time about the future and hard work and dreams. Almost turned it off. The speech was boring even by standards. Then the first graduate walked across the stage. The emotion sensors in station went wild. The readings were impossible. The happiness coming from that single human was stronger than anything they had ever recorded. It was not chemical happiness or programmed happiness or the quiet satisfaction that the elder races felt when everything was optimal. It was something raw and powerful and completely real. In the audience, a woman was crying. The sensors showed that she was the graduate's mother. She was feeling more joy in that moment than most felt in their entire lives. A man next to her, the father, was trying not to cry but failing. Two younger humans, siblings perhaps, were screaming the graduate's name. Watched the entire ceremony. Each graduate who crossed the stage created another spike of impossible happiness. The families erupted with joy every time. Some graduates pumped their fists in the air. Others danced. One very old human, much older than the others, walked slowly across the stage with a cane. When she reached the center, she raised her diploma above her head, and the audience gave her the loudest cheers of all. He did not understand what he was seeing. Called his supervisor, a senior analyst named. She arrived at his station within the hour, clearly annoyed at being pulled away from her work. "What is so urgent?" she asked. He showed her the recordings. He showed her the emotion readings. He watched her face change from irritation to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. "These readings cannot be correct," she said. "I have checked them 7 times. Run them again." He ran them again. The results were the same. Sat down heavily in the chair next to him. "We need to understand what is happening here. What exactly is this ceremony?" Had done his research. It is called graduation. The humans attend learning institutions for many years. 4 years is common for this level, though some attend for much longer. During this time, they study difficult subjects. They write papers and take examinations. They often do not sleep enough. Many of them work additional jobs to pay for the experience. They accumulate debt that takes decades to repay. They pay to suffer. Yes, and at the end they receive a piece of paper that says they completed the process. That is what the ceremony celebrates, the piece of paper. Stared at the frozen image on the screen. The graduate was caught mid-step, face split in a smile so wide it looked almost painful. "This makes no sense. Our citizens receive credentials at birth. The information is uploaded directly to their minds. There is no struggle, no debt, no years of insufficient sleep. It is efficient." "Yes," agreed. "But our citizens do not feel this way when they receive their credentials. They feel nothing at all." The silence stretched between them. "We need to bring this to the universal joy networks," said finally. "They have been searching for authentic happiness content for centuries. Every species in the galaxy has grown numb to manufactured pleasure. Our entertainment has become stale. Our citizens are bored with perfection. You think they will want to broadcast human graduations? I think they will fight each other for the rights." She was right. Within one standard week, The Universal Joy Networks had dispatched 17 documentary crews to Earth. They set up hidden cameras at universities across the planet. They interviewed graduates and families and professors. They collected thousands of hours of footage. The first broadcast reached 300 billion viewers across 47 sectors. The ratings were unprecedented. Species that had not felt genuine emotion and found themselves moved by the sight of young humans celebrating 4 years of hard work. The networks demanded more. Was promoted and given a new assignment. He was to find every type of human graduation ceremony that existed and document them all. He was to understand why this primitive species had discovered something that the advanced civilizations of the galaxy had lost. He began his work immediately. What he found would change everything. Spent the next 3 years on Earth. He traveled to every continent. He attended hundreds of graduation ceremonies. Each one taught him something new about the strange human relationship with happiness. He started with the obvious ones. University graduations were the most common, but they were also the most varied. Some schools held small ceremonies with only a few dozen graduates. Others filled massive stadiums with tens of thousands. The emotions were always intense, but the intensity varied based on factors that struggled to understand. He noticed that the older graduates seemed to generate the strongest emotional readings. At one ceremony in California, he watched a woman receive her degree at age 62. She had started college as a young woman but dropped out to raise her children. 40 years later, she had returned to finish what she started. When she walked across the stage, her grown children and filled an entire section of the audience. The joy readings were off the scale. He asked her afterwards why she had done it. Why spend years struggling with coursework when she could have simply enjoyed her retirement? "I made a promise to myself," she said, "and I finally kept it." He did not fully understand her answer, but he recorded it carefully. The Universal Joy Networks broadcast his findings across the galaxy. Species that had engineered away their capacity for delayed satisfaction watched with growing fascination. The hive councils issued formal inquiries. Why would any rational species design a system where offspring accumulated knowledge through stress rather than direct neural upload? Why make them earn credentials that could simply be assigned? The inefficiency was staggering. But they kept watching. Expanded his research. He discovered that humans had graduation ceremonies for almost everything. High school graduations marked the end of basic education. Students who were only 17 or 18 years old celebrated with the same intensity as university graduates. They cried and hugged and threw their hats in the air. They took countless photographs. They wrote messages to each other in books that they would keep forever. He found kindergarten graduations where tiny children, only 5 or 6 years old, wore miniature robes and caps. The children mostly looked confused by the ceremony, but their parents wept as if something profound had happened. In a way, realized it had. Their children had completed their first step on a very long journey. He attended military boot camp graduations where young soldiers stood in perfect formation while their families cheered. These ceremonies had a different quality. The graduates looked exhausted but proud. They had been pushed past their limits for months. They had been broken down and rebuilt. The happiness they felt was mixed with relief and a fierce sense of accomplishment. The most powerful ceremony he witnessed was at a rehabilitation center in Texas. 12 adults were graduating from a program for addiction recovery. Each one had fought battles that most species could not imagine. They had faced their own minds and bodies trying to destroy them. They had failed many times before finally succeeding. One graduate, a man named, had been addicted to drugs for 20 years. He had lost his job, his family, and his home. He had lived on the streets. He had tried to get clean 7 times before this program finally worked. When he received his certificate of completion, his hands were shaking. "I never thought I would make it," he said to the audience. "Every single day I wanted to quit, but I did not quit, and now I am here." The emotion readings from that small room were higher than anything had recorded at any university stadium. He broadcast the footage to the Universal Joy networks. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Billions of viewers who had never understood the concept of addiction found themselves moved to something they had not felt in centuries. The polyps, who had genetically eliminated addiction from their species 3,000 years ago, requested translated copies of speech. One philosopher, after watching the ceremony, experienced an emotion his species had eliminated generations ago. He described it as painful hope. He did not know what to call it because his language had no word for it. He spent the next year trying to understand what he had felt. Continued his research. He found culinary school graduations where aspiring chefs celebrated years of learning to cook. He found medical school ceremonies where exhausted students finally became doctors after nearly a decade of training. He found doctoral defenses where scholars presented their research to harsh committees and emerged transformed. Each ceremony was different, but they all shared something in common. The graduates had worked hard, they had struggled, they had sacrificed, and at the end they had earned their moment of happiness. The word earned became the key to everything. Wrote reports explaining the concept to the Galactic Council. He described how humans deliberately made things difficult for themselves. They created obstacles and then celebrated overcoming them. They valued the journey as much as the destination. They believed that happiness without effort was not real happiness at all. The elder species found this philosophy almost incomprehensible. They had spent removing obstacles from their societies. They had engineered perfect contentment. They had eliminated struggle because they believed struggle was bad. But now they were watching humans feel something they could not feel anymore. The Universal Joy Network's ratings continued to climb. Human graduation ceremonies became the most popular content across 17 sectors. Species that had forgotten what earned happiness felt like found themselves inexplicably moved by the spectacle of beings who voluntarily subjected themselves to years of difficulty for a few moments of triumph. The Galactic Council began to take notice. They convened an emergency session to discuss what they called the human satisfaction paradox. For the first time in 10,000 years, the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy were questioning their own approach to happiness. And they were doing it because of a young species on a small planet who still believed that some things were worth working for. Part 3: The Lesson. The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest enclosed space in the known universe. It could hold representatives from 10,000 species at once. On the day of the emergency session, every seat was filled. Beings of every shape and size had traveled across the galaxy to hear what they had discovered about human happiness. Stood at the central podium. He had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. He had watched thousands of hours of human ceremonies. He had interviewed hundreds of graduates. He had studied the philosophy and psychology of a species that the galaxy had previously dismissed as primitive and unimportant. Now he was going to tell the most advanced civilizations in existence that they had made a terrible mistake. For 10,000 years, he began, we have believed that happiness is a problem to be solved. We have engineered pleasure. We have eliminated pain. We have removed every obstacle from the path of our citizens because we believed that obstacles were bad. We have created perfect societies where no one struggles and everyone is content. He paused and looked around the chamber. Thousands of eyes, sensors, and perception organs were focused on him. We were wrong. A murmur went through the crowd. Several delegates from the elder species looked offended. The hive councils buzzed with agitation, but no one interrupted. The humans have taught us something we forgot long ago, continued. Happiness is not a state to be maintained. It is a destination to be reached. The journey matters, the obstacles matter, the struggle matters. When you remove the struggle, you do not create happiness, you create numbness. He activated the viewing sphere at the center of the chamber. An image appeared showing a human graduation ceremony. Thousands of graduates in black robes filled a stadium. Families cheered from the stands. These humans have spent 4 years working toward this moment. Some of them have worked much longer. They have sacrificed sleep. They have accumulated debt. They have failed examinations and had to try again. They have written papers that no one will ever read. They have spent years doing difficult things that provided no immediate reward. The image zoomed in on a single graduate crossing the stage. Her face was bright with joy. And now they feel something that we cannot feel anymore. They feel earned happiness. They feel the satisfaction of becoming more than they were. They feel the pride of accomplishing something difficult. These feelings are real in a way that our manufactured contentment has never been. The image changed to show the rehabilitation center in Texas. Stood at the podium, holding his certificate with shaking hands. This man fought a battle against his own mind for 20 years. He failed 7 times before he finally succeeded. When he received this certificate, the emotion readings were higher than any university stadium, higher than any event we have ever recorded. He earned his happiness through suffering that most of us cannot imagine. Turned off the viewing sphere, the chamber was completely silent. We removed struggle from our societies because we thought it was cruel. We believed we were being kind. Instead, we took away the very thing that makes happiness meaningful. We gave our citizens everything they could want, and in doing so, we gave them nothing worth wanting. The philosopher who had experienced painful hope stood up from his seat. His voice was quiet but clear. When I watched the human ceremonies, I felt something I had not felt in 300 years. I did not know what it was at first. I had to research our ancient texts to find a word for it. The word was longing. I was longing for something I had never had. I was longing for the chance to earn my own happiness. Other delegates began to stand. One by one, they shared similar experiences. They had felt something stir in their hive minds. They had begun questioning their own satisfaction systems. Species that had perfected happiness ago were suddenly wondering if they had perfected it incorrectly. The discussion continued for 3 days. In the end, the Galactic Council reached a decision that would change everything. They classified human graduation ceremonies as protected cultural artifacts. They established exchange programs so that other species could attend human ceremonies and experience earned happiness firsthand. They began dismantling some of their own satisfaction systems to allow for more natural emotional experiences. But the most significant change was philosophical. The Universal Joy Networks created a new category for their archives. They called it evidence that difficulty has value. Human graduation ceremonies were the first entries. The category grew quickly as other species began to understand what the humans had known all along. Returned to Earth for the final broadcast of his documentary series. He had chosen a small ceremony at a community college in rural America. Only 7 adults were graduating that night. Each one had overcome circumstances that would have broken most beings in the galaxy. One graduate was a single mother who had worked 2 jobs while raising 3 children. Another was a military veteran who had lost his leg in combat and spent years recovering. A third was a grandmother who had fled violence in her homeland and spent 3 years learning English just to take the entrance examinations. The ceremony was small and simple. There was no stadium, no marching band, no famous speakers. Just 7 adults in robes receiving diplomas from a smiling administrator. When the grandmother's name was called, she walked slowly to the stage. Her children and filled the first 3 rows. They had traveled from across the country to see this moment. She took her diploma and turned to face the audience. Then she raised it above her head and shouted something in her native language. The translation came through to the billions of beings watching across the galaxy. I did not give up. The emotion reading spiked higher than anything had ever recorded. Across the galaxy, beings who had forgotten what earned happiness felt like experienced something ancient stirring inside them. Several species immediately began dismantling their neural satisfaction implants. Others started designing new educational systems that included deliberate challenges. The grandmother's family rushed the stage to embrace her. She was crying. They were all crying. It was messy and loud and completely unprofessional. It was beautiful. Ended his broadcast with a simple statement. He said that humans had reminded the galaxy of something essential about the nature of joy. Happiness that was given freely meant nothing. Happiness that was earned through struggle and sacrifice and perseverance meant everything. The elder species had spent trying to perfect contentment. They had failed because they had not understood that perfection was not the goal. The goal was the journey. The goal was the becoming. The goal was the moment when a being could look back at everything they had overcome and say, with complete honesty, that they had earned their happiness. And on Earth, largely unaware of their galactic audience, humans continued doing what they had always done. They struggled. They failed. They got back up and tried again. They celebrated small victories and mourned temporary defeats. They gathered together in stadiums and gymnasiums and community centers to witness the transformation of their children and neighbors and friends. They kept graduating. In the end, it was not human weapons or technology or art that changed galactic civilization. It was the radical and ancient and profoundly simple notion that some things are worth working for, that difficulty has value, that the best happiness is the happiness you earn. The humans had never forgotten this truth. And now, thanks to a young species on a small planet who still believed in the power of earned achievement, the rest of the galaxy was finally beginning to remember. The end.